please turn to 1 John 4:19. We've learned in our church often, every sincere Christian will want to know, how can I love God better? And we've been given some really good direction on and good teaching that can help us in that area. And one of them was in this verse: we love because he first loved us. Another way we'd say it is, we love him because he first loved us. It's like it's almost like a U-shaped pipe where he flows down his love towards us, and then it shoots back up because it's all the pressure coming down. When we see God's love for us and we realize how much he loves us, then that's the drive for us to love him back like we should. And so as I've wanted to do that, I know that meditating on what God did for me on the cross, on his sacrifice, that's something that I can see his love, because there's no greater love, Jesus said, than this, that a man laid down his life for his friends. So I can see God's love as I meditate on the cross and what he did for me. And this week I was moved and blessed as I was reading about Gethsemane. I just read in a few verses about what Jesus was going through while he was in Gethsemane, and before the cross. He knew what was coming. He was fully aware of what suffering he was going to have to go through. And so I just wanted to read a few of the scriptures because I feel like it opened my eyes a bit more and blessed me to see how much Jesus suffered, not just on the cross, but even before it. So if you turn to Matthew 26, verses 37 and 38. So Jesus had gone there to Gethsemane, and he told his disciples to sit. And then verse 37 says, he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be grieved and distressed. Then he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch with me. He was grieving to the point of death. We all know what it is to grieve, but Jesus was grieving so deeply here. The person who was always so strong that nothing bothered him, and finally he came to this point in his life. He grieved to the point of death. And that phrase right there, it shows how deep it was, how deep his grief was. Then Mark 14, 33 through 36 says, and he took with him Peter and James and John and began to be very distressed and troubled. And he said to them, my soul is deeply grieved to the point of death. Remain here and keep watch. So he said the same thing. He was distressed and troubled. And then if you read on, he says, he went a little beyond them and fell to the ground, and he fell to the ground. He was so distressed and began to pray that if it were possible, the hour might pass him by. And he was saying, Abba, Father. He's crying out, Daddy, all things are possible for you. He's saying, there's some way that you can do this. I know that all things are possible for you. I'm sure there's a way that you could save these people without my sacrifice. Please let this cup pass from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Say, Father, I submit to this cup that you have for me. And when he was in such grief. And then in Luke 22, verses 41 through 44, he said, Luke 22:40, starting in verse 41, he withdrew from them about a stone's throw from the disciples, and he knelt down and began to pray, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. And God, it says here that an angel from heaven appeared to him, strengthening him. So God sent an angel to help him. And being in agony, they use that word agony right here in verse 44. He was praying very fervently, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down on the ground. And so after reading these, I got more of a glimpse of just how much Jesus was going through. he knew what was coming. He had he was fully aware. It wasn't like God kept him ignorant of what was happening until it happened. He was fully aware of what was going to happen, how hard it was going to be, the torment that was going to come on him. So the words the Bible uses, just to sum up, his soul was in agony. He was distressed and troubled even to the point of death. And then he was sweating like drops of blood. And I actually learned that there's been cases even today of people that have sweat drops of blood because of great grief. People, for example, who have, before going into a battle, people have been known to do that. They have pictures of it. People who've been preceding an execution, and I'm not sure if this is exactly what Jesus had, but it just gave me a glimpse of what Jesus was going through. So basically what they say happens is the capillaries around the blood glands, they're so stressed that they burst, and then the blood mixes with the sweat. And just it helped me to appreciate more just what grief Jesus was suffering. And so he knew it was coming and how terrible it would be. And so it's like Jesus wasn't just suffering on the cross, he was suffering before that. And this is what he was doing for us. And so to me, I want to think about these things more, because the greatness of his sacrifice helps me to recognize the greatness of his love for me. And one thing that Sandeep said in one of the recent messages when he was away was that something significant for me that helped is the best way to overcome sin is not by feeling sorry over it, but it's by loving God more. And but when I see God's love for me, that's when I'll be on the right track. It's not trying to stir up emotions over how much if I'm loving God like I should and seeing his love for me, then I'll be sorry over it. And that's the best thing that can drive me to overcome it. And you might have heard of a story where there was some missionaries who sold themselves to be slaves permanently to get the gospel out to some other slaves who had never heard it. The only way they could get the gospel to these slaves was to sell themselves into slavery for the rest of their life. And they were basically giving up their life, throwing their lives away just to get the gospel to these people. And when they were sailing away on the ship, they said, "May the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering." So you might have heard that before. But the thing that stood out to me that I never noticed before was that they had the lamb that was slain before them. That was what was in their eyes. That was driving them to do this. And so I see that's what I want before my eyes all the time. That's what will drive me to live for God, is to see the lamb that was slain and to always want to live for him, to praise him all the time, to want to overcome sin, to never complain. I was thinking we've been talking about complaining and praising as we've gone through the Psalms, and I was thinking how if a man, it'd be kind of like, for me to complain against God would be sort of like if a man pushed me out of the way of an oncoming bus and then he got hit and got paralyzed. And let's say we became friends after that. And so, and he decided to visit me one day. So he's paralyzed, so he can't drive, but he takes a taxi and picks up breakfast. And he comes over to my house and he says, "Hey, Bobby, it's good to see you." And he's paralyzed. So I help him in, and he lays the breakfast out before me. "I got this for you." So he's the one that sacrificed for me, that gave his life for me. And then I look at the breakfast and I say, "Oh, well, this has mushrooms. I don't like mushrooms. Sorry, this is disgusting. I can't eat this." I was thinking how evil that would be. What kind of wickedness it would take for me to complain against somebody who gave his life for me, that's trying to do something good for me. That is, to me, that gave me a glimpse of what type of ugly spirit complaining is. Because that's what I'm doing when I complain. My Father in heaven gave his Son for me. Jesus gave his life for me, and they're giving me they're showering gifts of love on me. And I say, "Oh, I don't like this. That's disgusting. I don't like this job. That's no good. Commute's too long. Salary's not high enough. I don't like what you gave me. My problem, it's too many problems in life. It's too hard." And so to me, the spirit, the spirit of ugliness there. It's, Lord, forgive me for all the times that I've complained against him. It made me really open my eyes thinking about that, how it's just like that. How can I ever say life is too hard or too inconvenient? Your yoke is too much after what God did for me. And so having an attitude like that is just like having that complaining attitude towards a paralyzed man who goes out of his way to, he saved my life, and then I complain about the breakfast that he brings me. What a shame that would be. I never want to complain again against God. And I want to say, Lord, whatever you have for my life, I'm happy to accept it. I want you to have some reward from my life, just like those missionaries said. May the lamb that was slain receive the reward of his suffering. The one that was slain for me, that grieved drops of blood, may he receive something from my life. And I'm happy to take whatever he has for me, whether it hurts or not, because he's really, it's foolish to fight against somebody, one, who's all powerful, but two, who's trying to do good for me. Who out of love, how can I ever complain and kick and scream against him, like throwing tantrums? And so I'll just kind of wrap up by sharing one of my favorite verses from Luke. If you're still there, you can turn a few verses back. Luke 17, verse 10. So you too, when you do all the things which are commanded, you say, we are unworthy slaves. We have done only that which we ought to have done. When we have the cross before us all the time, the great things that we do aren't going to seem so great, because we're seeing what he did for us. And the hard things won't seem so hard because we have the great sacrifice in mind. How can anything that I do for God or anything that I suffer for God be called a sacrifice after what he's done for me? So my encouragement is I want to keep meditating on what God did for me and praising him, and asking him that by his Holy Spirit he'll open my eyes to have revelation on that. And I believe that's how the best way that our lives can be transformed.